just leaned into it.
Jenny Reese, and I can guarantee I am not the president of Costa Rica.
So we had to convince a whole crew of people that Jenny, who is very much not a Latino man, was not the president of Costa Rica. And that probably sets the tone for the fun we'll have today for the next, call it 45 minutes or so. First and foremost, Jenny, I want to start with you. How did you end up in your role, right? Like city council to mayor to director. How'd that happen?
So I had had multiple interactions with the then Lieutenant Governor, Spencer Cox, in my role as mayor. Didn't know him extremely well, but obviously we interacted at various political functions and when he was in Utah County, and he was elected and reached out to me a few weeks afterwards and asked if I would consider a position on his cabinet. And here I am.
Did you volunteer? Were you voluntold? How did that actually happen?
It did require me to resign my position as mayor, so I needed to think about that for a little bit, but I was ready for a new challenge, and he is a great governor, and I was excited to be a part of his administration.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I love that. So today's topic, driving change, shaping culture. There's been quite a bit of change at the Department of Government Operations. Can you frame for us, like set a foundation for the culture change we're talking about? What happened not long ago? Like this is a relatively new change. We've got a combination of a couple agencies. Like talk me through what that was.
So after the governor was elected, he decided he wanted to do two things. Number one, he wanted to consolidate agencies that provided services to the same customers in order to improve the customer experience and to break down silos, improve collaboration. And he also wanted to shrink the size of his cabinet as he felt it would be better, you would have better collaboration among cabinet members if it was smaller in scale. So we were one of those. In fact, when I was interviewing, he let me know he was going to be consolidating 3 agencies into one. So there was the Department of Administrative Services that had 7 divisions, and then the Department of Technology Services and the Department of Human Resource Management that were all going to come under one umbrella as the Department of Government Operations. And it made sense because all of those agencies were providing services to the same customers, which is mainly other state entities. And so to improve that service, he was bringing them under one department.
Okay, so I've got another quick video clip.
I think there was a lot of fear out there. This was a big change, so there were quite a few unknowns. Was this an attempt to lay people off and to reduce the overall workforce? What does it mean for my job? What does it mean for my future here within the state of Utah? So it was a new approach, and it caused quite a bit of concern and fear.
Okay, so as we talk about leadership and change, it's about the people that we work with. And I think that was a response to talking about that consolidation. A lot of fear. So I'm gonna head to Marilee for a second. As you were watching that change happen, and I wanna talk a little bit about that transition team aspect as well. What were you seeing within the state as we were combining 3 agencies? What was the tenor across people?
I'm sure, as you can imagine, there was lots and lots of gossip. Everybody knew somebody who knew what was happening. There was a lot of folks who were beginning to look for jobs. There were, fortunately, a lot of employees coming to us to ask questions. There were lots of folks coming forward telling us this is what you need to do and this is why that person should go. There was lots of chatter among division directors, but I think the thing that stands out in my mind the most is there was lots of kingdom protecting. So not going to give up any information, not going to share, going to dig our feet in, our feet, heels, toes.
One of those.
One of those things that you dig in. There was, at every level, there was lots of kingdom protecting.
Okay. And Chris, you've talked about that kingdom protecting as well. I know you talked about it kind of in the context of technology. What did you see at that time period that Marilee just described?
Yeah, so at that time frame, we were still in the middle of COVID. We were just starting to roll out the vaccine distribution. And I was a division director for the Division of Purchasing at that time. And as we're talking about a consolidation, we're bringing in 2 other departments into, or 3 departments into one. The Department of Technology Services had a procurement group within their department already, and then they were going to be merging in with the Division of Purchasing.
Yeah.
And that made a lot of people nervous because they didn't know, were they going to be needed, what was going to happen, what processes were going to change. And this was on a grand scale, just not within our department, but within the state of Utah, is there was confusion on how it was going to be. So just at that moment in time, we were trying to get with vendors for the vaccine distribution, but also trying to figure out whether or not we were going to have a job come July 1st, and this was in January, February of that year.
Yeah. So I'd imagine most folks in the room have dealt with something like this, right? You make a decision strategically to consolidate for efficiency and efficacy, but you've got people who are freaking out, right? Like our people don't necessarily get it. How'd you grapple with that? What were some of the steps to maybe mitigate some of the fear and the distrust perhaps within the agency?
It became evident to us from the very beginning that number one, we needed to engage with employees and have them feel and participate in feel like they're part of this process and actually actively participate in the consolidation. And ours was fast. It was introduced to the legislature in January 2021. It was passed in March of 2021, and we were to be consolidated by July of 2021. So it was a fast transition. And we also recognized that we needed to make sure that we were communicating frequently with employees and that they were hearing from us to really stop that rumor mill and some of those crazy things that can get out of control. So one of the things we did from the very beginning is we had a weekly town hall Zoom with all employees where they would log in and we would provide an update as how the transition was coming along and what things we were working on, which employees were on which transitions teams, which I'll talk about in just a second. And then just opened up the floor to ask questions, any question they wanted. And so they either put it in the chat, they could speak up and ask, or we created a way for them to submit questions anonymously through our intranet if they wanted to ask a question that they didn't want their name associated with. And we answered every single question. We didn't shy away from them. Sometimes we didn't know the answer, and we said, I don't have an answer for that yet.
Wait, you did what?
I know.
You just said, I don't know.
So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I mean, here I am. I just started this job. I'm learning state government anyway, and we said I don't have the answer. And it was amazing how many employees would either come up to us after or via email and say how they appreciated a leader saying, I don't know the answer to that, instead of just making something up on the fly. The number of people who said that to us was surprising to me, but they were really appreciative about that.
I love it. Can I I'll pull a quote. This is from Roger Martin, Dean Emeritus at Rotman School of Business. Literally the only way I've seen culture change in the 42 years since I graduated from business school is when a leader sets out to demonstrate a different kind of behavior and makes that behavior work. Other people take cues from that behavior and slowly but surely the culture changes. So that I don't know, and we're going to be visible, to borrow from Dr. Poor yesterday, right? Visibility is important. We're going to be on stage and we're going to talk to you and we're going to shoot it straight, and when we don't know, we're going to say, we don't know. How have you seen that ripple through the work that folks are doing in the state of Utah?
I think it's been very well received, and it has set this understanding that it's okay for us to not have all of the answers, and it's okay to throw out ideas that we can discuss and analyze. And one of the things we've really wanted to emphasize is the importance of bringing different perspectives to the table, and making sure that our frontline employees have an opportunity to weigh in just as much as the executive team has an opportunity. And so we've created various channels for that kind of feedback, and I feel it's been very well received, and employees are starting to lose that fear and that concern that they had about this big shakeup and change in government.
And diverse perspectives, my understanding is that starts with Governor Cox, who invites differing opinions to the table, requires, it might even be a better word. Like, I want to make sure everybody who has a different lens on an opportunity or a perspective on a thing is there to share that with me. Has that generally been the case? I mean, is that true? That's what you hear. Is that real?
It is real. Governor Cox is from rural Utah, and so he he has been very passionate about making sure that when we are leading the state and bringing the state forward, that we're getting perspectives, number one, throughout the state, whether it's just along the Wasatch Front, but also the urban communities and other areas that aren't experiencing the same types of opportunities and challenges that the urban center is. He was very intentional in the selection of his cabinet to make sure that there were more women at the table. And he engages with the private sector quite a bit, and our educational leaders as well, to just say we need to look at problems from a 360-degree view and make sure that we're not missing something, because we're going to make better decisions if we have more people at the table helping us understand.
Okay, all right. So I want to talk about transition teams for a second. There's sharing what we're doing, but then there's actualizing what we're doing, and it sounds like you all had a pretty solid strategy for that. Marilee, can you talk about the transition teams, what that meant for how you moved forward and why you did that in the first place?
Sure. So at the very beginning, we put together a number of transition teams, and we had a transition champion, and then we had employees that we called to serve on these different transition teams. These teams included things like a communications team, a policy team. We had 3 agencies with very different methods of approaching the same issues. And so we needed a policy team who would go in and make recommendations to us of what the new policy should be. We had a team that went in and looked at audits and legislative requirements and things like that, so we could get our hands around that. We had, what other teams did we have? We had
Technology.
a technology team that looked at cross-technology and some of those issues that were going to bubble up. I think we had like 8 or 9 committees. As we formally became an agency, some of those committees went away and others exist to this day and are critically important to how we go about doing our work. So an awful lot of the decisions that the executive director's office makes are fed up through committees of employees, and we try really, really hard to make sure that communication is both ways. So, for example, on a policy committee, they may come forward with a recommendation, and instead of saying, "You must be kidding us," we say, "Okay, interesting, have you thought of this and this and this? Can you go back in your committee and talk about those things and come back with your resolution?"
Yeah. It's one of the things I've taken as we've gotten to know each other is when we throw something out, some folks have the propensity to recoil when you say something crazy, which Scott and I are wont to do on occasion. What I found with the 3 of you, at least, is when we throw something out, you just kind of cock your head. It's, "Oh, that's interesting that you said that, let's discuss it." And that felt cultural as we got to know some of the folks as we went through the state government buildings in Utah. Like, that seemed to be a common thread of, let's explore that thing that just got thrown out, rather than, "Oh my God, that we could never." And how did you get there? I mean, that seems like something that you have to culturally just continue modeling. Is that the case, and is that the thread that you all kind of run with?
Definitely. I think that I'm going to go here, so just kick me if
Oh,
I
no.
need to.
I hate it when she does this. I never know where she's going.
I feel like we have gotten really good at having hard conversations. So we talk a lot about the surface kind of stuff, and I don't mean that the way that it sounds, but we talk about employee engagement. We talk about listening to our employees. We talk about those things, but at some point in time, you have to be able to have difficult conversations. And in Utah, we call that gutting the fish. And what we mean by that is we bring people together, we put the fish on the table, we get down to what the real issues are, and then we barbecue the fish, and we have so what that looks like is when we're bringing these agencies together who honestly, in some cases, didn't really care for each other and were highly offended that this was happening and had a hard time accepting that it was happening. We would have these conversations where we would just go right in and say, oh, this is tough. Like, this must be really, really tough. It feels like you are resisting this change from our side. Help us see, what does that look like from your side? And you keep digging and digging until you get to the core of what the resistance is, and then you can work out whatever it is.
Yeah. I love that you used the gutting the fish, but then we get to barbecue the
It
fish.
is a very violent metaphor. But
It really is. No, but I like it. That's maybe why I like it. So Jenny, to quote you, leaders eat last. This was from months ago when we talked. Leaders eat last, and then you threw out 3 words that I really liked: empowered, accountable, and safe. And that was in context of the maybe previous culture not trusting each other. You just maybe didn't care for each other, to use Marilee's words. And that feeling of retaliation if you bring up a differing opinion or dissenting opinion, but that leaders eat last. Like, we've got to make sure everybody's settled so we can do our work well, and then leaders get to step in and enjoy the fruits or the barbecue of having gutted the fish. Like, that feels important for how you've started to shift culture across the state of Utah. Like, what does that feel like when you're in the middle of it?
In the middle of it, it feels a little chaotic at times, right? and as Marilee said, you had 3 very different cultures and different challenges and different backgrounds and experiences that were now trying to come in, and new leadership, a new governor, and I was a new executive director, and so a little bit of what is this going to look like in reality? And so I think for a while it was chaotic, and one of the things that Marilee talked about with these transition teams, we agreed from the beginning we really wanted to empower employees and, like I said, have them be part of this process. So the only requirements that we had when we picked our champion for each team was you have to include people on your team from all 3 of the agencies. So if it was a technology committee, we don't just want the technology people at the table. We want you to bring in somebody from Fleet or somebody from HR and bring in those perspectives and be very intentional about collaboration.
Yeah.
So in addition to the transition teams, we have continued to been very intentional at creating cross-divisional teams that can solve problems looking at our customers, our agencies, from a holistic view instead of through their siloed lens of just their division. And so I think it started off a little chaotic, but we've gotten into this rhythm and this understanding of our goal is to provide better customer service. And the only way that we can do that is if we are working together and talking together and looking again at our agencies as a customer as a whole instead of just our piece of it, and working behind the scenes to address their problems from that perspective.
Oh, I love that. That makes so much sense when you say it out loud. But to your point, it feels messy when you're in the middle of it. Chris, I know you've been at the helm of a couple process improvement and system rollouts. Talk to me about how that felt when you were first starting in that role, and now that you've got some time under your belt and culture has started to shift, what that looks like now as you're implementing new systems or processes.
Yeah, at the very beginning, it was very overwhelming because we did have 3 departments that were coming in. They all had their processes in place. They knew what they were doing. They were very familiar with them. I was here for the operational excellence conference at the beginning of this, and it is messy. It's overwhelming. People don't want to change. People don't want to do something different that they've done for the last 20, 30 years. They feel like if they do, they're going to either be let go or they're going to have to learn new things. And so at the very beginning, when we were looking at the different processes and seeing how they all played out and realizing this consolidation is going to be a very good thing, because there's not one service we provide to our customers that isn't touching multiple divisions now. And so as we sat down and would look at processes, as we would look at how to go about them, we had to have discussions at times of saying, look, you might be giving up some of your process, some of your identity in the past. But the reason we're doing this is to try and make it better for the customers and for the state. And those were hard conversations. Employees were resistant to change. It's not going to be one of those things where we can say, hey, we've done it. It took us 2 months, but we overcame overcame Everest in doing this. We're still working on some of those processes and still trying to connect and engage with those employees to make sure that they feel safe and realize, hey, this process isn't going to be that bad.
Valued, safe, empowered, accountable continues to be the thread. I want to pull another thread. You said folks who've been around 20, 30, 40 years. That's a real thing, and I think there's this balance of how are we attracting and retaining new talent, and how are we making sure we're capturing institutional knowledge of folks who've been around for a while. So I want to spend a tiny bit of time. Jenny, you mentioned Governor Cox is from rural Utah, so I've got another quick clip for us.
One of the things that Governor Cox, he himself comes from rural Utah, has said is that the biggest export coming out of rural Utah is their children. And that obviously impacts the economy of those towns and cities. And many of those individuals want to stay in their communities and raise their kids where they were raised, and there just aren't a lot of job opportunities.
So let's talk a little bit about the balance. We want the kids stepping into state government, feeling like there's a place and jobs for them, and we've got folks who've been in government for a long time, they've been around the block, they've seen how the sausage is made, and that's valuable. And so you've got this kind of, I think the term was silver tsunami. You've got folks who are leaving state government, you've got folks who want to get in. Like, just talk to me about how you're grappling with all of that.
I think it's probably very similar to what any other state is dealing with. It's a different perspective to the workforce or the workplace that the younger generation has from those who have been here. We don't go into this now expecting that our employees are going to stay with us for 30 years anymore. And so we've had to really adapt and shift. How are we becoming a place where people want to be, and if they're only going to stay for 3 to 5 years, how are we helping them to be, how can we get the best that we can out of that and still sustain that historical and knowledge for the agency. And Chris actually is probably better than I am to talk about this, but we've introduced a mentorship program in our agency where employees can sign up to either be a mentor or a mentee or both to help with some of that job shadowing and training and knowledge of, or transfer of knowledge. And Chris, you're probably, this is your thing.
Yeah, no, it's been a fun program because it's not just about job shadowing and making sure somebody learns a specific skill, but it's those soft skills that employees were most looking for.
Yeah.
How are decisions made? That's not something a lot of our employees know or knew at the time. So they were looking to just connect with the manager and say, okay, how do you make those decisions? How do you go about your daily work day? What do you do from day to day? And it's been really eye-opening to see some of these employees that probably would not have flourished start to come up with ideas in their mentor-mentee groups and be able to express where they want to go. We had a mentee comment back to me that when she started this, she really just thought she was going to learn what another agency did, which was one of the reasons we set it up was so that we'd break down some silos and the IT people could look at the procurement people and say, oh, you're not the enemy, you're not that bad, right? But
not that bad, not the enemy are two different things, to be clear.
Well, they would say it both ways depending on the mood and who, but then this person just said, you know what, I was able to learn from my mentor how they progressed in government, that it wasn't a quick, they weren't moved up quick, this is what their career path, and it really helped that mentee realize the career path they wanted to take. Yeah. And actually made them focus of saying, okay, I need to go from this position to here, and that's where I want to go, instead of just thinking that line was vertical.
Yeah.
And so it's helped them with career development, developing soft skills, and just getting to know people, which today is needed. I think we learned about that this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, a question for the group, just by show of hands, is anybody seeing a shortened tenure? To Jenny's point, seeing folks who are staying 3 to 5 years rather than 25, 30. Is anybody seeing that shift in your state as well? Got a couple nods, couple hands. Okay, I love that. All right. Marilee, I want to continue on the people thread. Returnships. You all have a program in Utah about returnships, which is not an internship. It's a return. Talk to me about what that term means and what it looks like in Utah.
You betcha. So a returnship targets a very specific group of people. It targets those people, largely women, but not exclusively women, who have been out of the workforce for a number of years and want to re-enter. And so we have a program, we run several cohorts each year where these folks can sign up, and we will help them renew their skills. We will put them in a position in any one of the state agencies where they can grow. They get mentors, they get training, they get help spicing up their LinkedIn profiles. Many of these folks are hired into the agencies permanently. But these are folks who had skills, they had experience, they've just taken a little break in their career, and now they want to come back. I am a returner, and so I feel really strongly about the investment in these folks.
And do those folks stick around? I mean, do we find, I got like a hard nod from Chris. Absolutely. They come in, they find some value, they stay.
Yeah.
So it's been successful, is what I'm hearing.
It's very successful. Plus I said I'm a returner, and I feel this connection wanting to help these folks. So you feel that, I'm going to say just almost a little bit more than just the interns coming out of college, although there's a place for both.
Yeah. Moving from benefits, right? What will this job do for me, to a sense of service and camaraderie was one of the phrases you threw out when we were talking originally. It sounds like this drives that home. Like, Utah has shown up for me, therefore working in state government makes sense, and I can drive value and improve the experience of our customers. That sounds incredible. Marilee, I want to stick on you for a second.
Again, going back to this culture that even Governor Cox started with, which is building trust. He shared a study that showed that trust between citizens and government is at an all-time low. And one of the best ways to build trust is just to be transparent and to communicate often, to share your story, to explain the whys. And we've really embraced that within our department, which is we're not going to shy away from hard questions. We're going to answer transparently, and also if we don't have an answer, we're going to say, I don't have an answer for that, but we'll figure it out and we'll come back to you.
So you touched on that earlier, but that idea of returnships, of creating new avenues, what I love as a thread is getting new voices in the room. So requiring, you've got cross-disciplinary teams as you're transitioning, like all of those pieces drive to transparency. And Chris, you touched on understanding how decisions are made, right? Like if I've got a mentor who explains the process, I have a better understanding of how I move forward. So that seems to be overarching theme, comes from Governor Cox, but do you continue to see people respond to that? Like, do people articulate that this is why I'm sticking around?
Absolutely. I think it goes back to that engagement and empowerment where employees want to feel like they have a voice in some of these critical decisions, especially since they're the ones that are on the ground and having to implement them, right? They often know better than we do what their customers need or how feasible an idea might be. And so when we ultimately do come to a decision, especially if it was one where there might be different perspectives that saw things differently, the more that we're communicating with our employees, here's our decision, our policy, and here's the reason why, we have found that even those who may not necessarily have gotten what they wanted appreciate that we're taking the time to explain the process that we went through to get there and why we're implementing this. And it empowers them when they're engaging with our customers, if customers have questions, to be able to respond and answer and know why we're going in that direction.
I love that. You're running focus groups, and you kind of do that regularly to that end of making sure we're a part of the process. What are you finding from focus groups, and are you going to continue that process as you continue doing work?
So this has been really successful for us. I heard one state say that they were running pulse surveys, and we're doing the same. Pulse surveys for us mean that about every 2 weeks or so, we run a survey that has 2 questions. And the questions, they all have a foundation in our values, which are,
Service, engagement, accountability, and trust.
I was just testing. So there are questions like, do you feel like your supervisor really takes your ideas seriously? That might be one question. Another question might be, are you empowered to make decisions within the scope of your stewardship, or do you have to run it up the chain? So those would be the kinds of questions that we run on the Pulse survey. Then, as we get these back, if we see either in the data just straight from the survey or in the comments, every survey has the opportunity for employees to comment, that we have a troublesome area, then we run a focus group. And employees have the ability to sign up for these focus groups, and they're safe. We're not in them. We make sure that nobody in their direct reporting line are in a focus group with the employees, so it's a very safe place. And then they can go in and just expound a little bit on what they're feeling. And that's because we can run surveys all day long, but we have all experienced where we run a survey, we think we know what the problem was, when in fact the survey question wasn't specific enough for us to really know enough to fix the problem. So the focus group really helps us hone in on what the problem is.
Okay.
And then we push all of these results always out to our employees. So
Everybody gets to see them.
they are seeing the same information that we're seeing.
That's cool. All right, so I'm gonna see if I can synthesize what we've just heard. You had a new governor, new executive director, decided to combine 3 agencies. The chronology there is a little messy, and it probably felt messy at the time. Big piece was communication and transparency, some cross-disciplinary connections as we were transitioning. So the folks leading transition teams, you had somebody from each of the agencies to make sure that went through. We're thinking about attracting and retaining talent, so we're looking at rural communities like where Governor Cox is from. We're pulling returnships into the mix. We're making sure process improvement and mentorship programs are happening so we understand decisions. And then the cross thread of all of that is we're constantly checking in and doing surveys and focus groups and making sure we're hearing from people. I mean, does that encompass, did I miss anything really big there? As I granted, just slightly bastardized what you've done, right? It's been a big project, a beautiful one, but to translate that to something tangible as I'm hearing about culture change, like it seems like you just over communicated everything to your people, and it seems like it's working.
Very much so. I would say the only thing you missed is there was a lot of caffeine added to that.
Coffee, did you just mainline the coffee? There we go.
We're from Utah, it's Diet Coke.
Diet Coke. All right, Marilee, you've got your Diet Coke. Is
That's
that
right.
still in hand? I like it.
And we've heard that from employees still continually, how much they appreciate the communication, how much they appreciate feeling informed along the way. We have continued with the town halls. We don't do them weekly anymore, but we do them monthly still, where any employee can join. We talk about our plans, we talk about how we're progressing, and then we still open it up to questions.
I love
You know what, I
Chris.
also just want to,
Yeah.
see, I do it to them all the time.
All the time. So one of the things, like as we went through this process, I reached constantly out to the other states. I know I had quite a few conversations with people in this room, with your employees, to say, hey, this is what we're doing. We're trying to improve. Like, how does it work for you? I mean, I talked to Marilyn about how Utah could create a more diverse supplier group for the state as we're consolidating. That was one of the efforts that the committee wanted to work on, is how do we work on that? So we attended committee or conferences, we reached out to other states, we worked with other groups, NASPO, NASCA, to say, hey, this is what we're going through, and seeing what worked, what didn't, because the end goal, and I was with the Division of Purchasing when most of this was going on, is let's not try and reinvent the wheel. This has gone on in other states. Let's focus on those positives, show what's worked, and go from there as well.
I love that. Marilee, you were going to add
I just
something.
wanted to say, one thing that I think that we have really learned is building a culture. If you want to build a new culture, it's not a program, it's not an initiative, it is one person at a time. And that's what we're learning. Some come along quickly and others take more help. But eventually you have to appeal to each individual person, one at a time.
Oh, I'm so glad you did that, because I have a last clip.
When Jenny first came in January, probably within the first 10 days of her arrival, I came down with COVID. And it was really serious. I ended up in the hospital and was quite literally fighting for my life. And she called me. I think I was at the hospital. She called me and she said, "You're going through this. You've got to be concerned about your job because this is a new administration. And I want you to know that, like, I'm committed to you for the next many years. You take whatever months you need to recover from this." The reason I'm telling you this is because once I felt that commitment, I could settle down, and not only could I focus on being better, but it's affected how I've done my job when I came back and got myself back up to speed. I knew that I had the commitment of not only the executive director, but of my boss. And the reason that that's important is because that filters down through the organization. Now, the people that I have stewardship over, I pass that commitment on along to them. And so the message is not be worried about your job because we don't know where all of this is going to take us. The message is we are going to face some tough problems and we are going to do it together. And let's put your mind at ease. Like, I've got your back, but we are going to do difficult things.
Earlier, you were a little emotional as you gave that clip. I'm going to talk about that for a second. Like, what did that feel as Jenny shared what she did?
I remember that time. Sorry.
Take your time.
I remember laying in that hospital bed and thinking, crap, I'm a sole provider for my home, for my household. And this is the crappiest time to be in this situation. And I was so sick. And that is one of the kindest things anyone's ever done for me, was when she called and said, "Don't you worry at all. Like, I need you for the next 8 years. You take the next 3-4 months to get better." And like, that was life-changing for me, and the impact that that had on me. Now, I still, was pulling my oxygen thing up to meetings because, FOMO, but but I knew that I was safe. And as we build this culture, it was not lost on me that employees, for different reasons, it wasn't COVID, but employees didn't feel safe. And I had experienced what a change it felt like to have somebody make me feel safe. And so I wanted to do that for the employees who needed that from me. Like, I can't promise you that it's going to be roses, but I can promise you that you're going to be okay. We're going to work through it together. We are going to have some hard conversations, but those conversations are going to be about the thing. They're not going to be about you and whether you have a place here. You have a place here.
So I want to land it with one last question for Jenny. Why'd you do what you did for Marilyn? Like, why? 'Cause that feels like the thread of leadership in Utah.
I think it ultimately comes down to treating people like people.
Mm.
Like we have a hard job, and there's always challenges, and there are always new things that are thrown at us, and we're not going to be successful personally or as an organization if there is a culture of fear or that I don't matter, my leaders don't care. And there's a Peter Drucker quote that I love. He says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I believe it. You can have the best strategies in the world, and if your people are miserable, then it's not going to matter. You're not going to be successful. Your culture matters a lot. And so I very much wanted with the people who report directly to me to know, as Mary Lee said, we're going to do this, and it's going to be tough, and there are always going to be challenges, but we're in it together. If you're committed to our team and our vision and our mission, then we have a place for you here.
I love that. That brings us right to time. Chris, Mary Lee, Jenny,